Hi everybody. So today's lesson is going to be for Wednesday, April 22nd. You have a bell ringer today and we are doing slides 25 through 26. One of them is a writing slide and one of them is a picture slide. But first I want to kind of recap the last thing we talked about, which was the Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest time our country ever came to nuclear war, and it's awful and it was absolutely terrifying. I know because that video kind of got rushed at the end and it was a little stressful. So let's kind of go over some of the stuff that we talked about. So if we go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis slide, we have the knowledge now that the Soviets are sending nuclear weapons and continuing to send nuclear weapons to Cuba because Nikita Khrushchev and Fidel Castro are working together, and so the Soviet Union is putting nuclear weapons in Cuba, which is very scary for us because Cuba is only now 90 miles from us. So we put nuclear weapons in Turkey, which is close to the Soviet Union, just in case anything were to happen, and so we can protect ourselves. So Khrushchev is saying that these nuclear weapons are defensive missiles, and we have spy planes that fly over and we realize that they're offensive missiles, and we have pictures there of like maps that we discovered too with our spy planes. Those are in your slides as well. So this is getting really tense, and the Cuban Missile Crisis is going to last 13, 14 days, and it is high tension between both countries, the United States and the Soviet Union. We are very scared that Nikita Khrushchev could make a move very quickly and not think things through. I ended that video reading some segments from the book The Kennedy Tapes. JFK, as we know, secretly recorded his meetings throughout the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it has like the dates at the top and the times, because he realized like how important this was for history. Like, this is a big deal. This is nuclear war here, and no one's ever dealt with something like this before. So he secretly recorded these meetings, and now we have them in a book that we can access, and there are letters in here between the two leaders. And I finished the video also saying that we are very lucky that we had these two leaders, that it was Nikita Khrushchev and it was JFK. I'm not saying Nikita Khrushchev was a saint, but they were both very slow in their actions, and they thought about things before they just like jumped to conclusions, which is very good and very, very helpful in a situation like this, because you need all the information. It wasn't very fast-paced because they took their time to decide on what would be the best outcome for their people. So we have the Cuban Missile Crisis. We have missiles in Turkey. The Soviet Union has missiles in Cuba. It's getting very tense. How the Cuban Missile Crisis ended, I said that the weapons were removed. This is actually a letter from Khrushchev that he wrote to JFK. He says, "I propose, for our part, we will declare that our ships bound for Cuba will not carry any kind of armaments. You would declare that the United States will not invade Cuba with its forces and will not support any sort of forces which might intend to carry out an invasion of Cuba." So basically, we will stop sending missiles to Cuba if you promise not to invade Cuba. And if you watch this head-to-head video, I also mentioned this in the video as well, which you should watch. You know, this is how it ended. So Khrushchev is saying, okay, we will stop sending missiles to Cuba, but you have to promise not to invade Cuba. The reason why we're sending missiles there in the first place is because we're worried that you're going to invade. And so JFK says, okay, so the missiles are removed from Cuba. We don't invade, and the Cuban Missile Crisis ends. We also decrease the amount of arms that we have in Italy and Turkey as well. So it de-escalates, and the Cuban Missile Crisis is over. Thank goodness. So like I said, we're very lucky to have those leaders. I mean, Khrushchev signs this letter, the same letter, mind you, where he starts off, "Dear Mr. President, I got your letter. I got the feeling that you have some understanding of the situation which has developed and some sense of responsibility. I value this." And then he also, this is the same letter that he threatens Kennedy with mutually assured destruction, which, but you well know the very least which you would receive in reply would be that you would experience the same consequences as those which you would send us, right? Like, that's mutually assured destruction. That is mad. And at the very end, he comes to an agreement and says, you know, we'll stop sending weapons if you don't invade Cuba. And then he says, "Respectfully yours," and Khrushchev. I mean, it's just crazy. This is diplomacy, and it is wild to look back at this and be like, the closest our country came to nuclear war, and they're signing letters, "Respectfully yours." I mean, see how lucky we are to have leaders who actually can talk about things without like jumping to war immediately. So it was very helpful for us for sure. So yeah, this is the Kennedy tapes. That was the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's fascinating. It is fascinating to look at the things that were said and how diplomacy actually works. It's really nice. It's awesome. So what were the outcomes of the crisis? That is the slide we're doing today. 25 is titled Effects of the Crisis, and 26 is a picture slide. So there's one vocab word, and it is Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, or just the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. The TED Ed also mentioned this as well. So let's read the slide. So Khrushchev warned that trying to stop the Soviets from sending weapons to Cuba would mean war. The United States issued a quarantine because he didn't want to say it was a blockade, basically meaning that like you can't enter this water, and Khrushchev gets upset because it's international water. You can't tell me where I can and cannot go. There's some tension there, of course. October 24th, as they neared the U.S. blockade, they turned back. And 2 days later, Kennedy received a letter from Khrushchev offering to remove the missiles if the U.S. pledged never to invade Cuba, which we just read in the letter that Khrushchev sent Kennedy in this book. It is awesome. So cool. So cool. So Khrushchev says, listen, we won't continue to send missiles if you promise not to invade Cuba. The next day, he received a tougher letter from Khrushchev demanding that the U.S. remove its missiles from Turkey. Advisors told Kennedy to ignore the second letter and accept the first one, because if we don't have to remove all of our missiles from a location, then we're not going to, right? Let's keep some missiles over there. The incident is the closest the world has ever come to nuclear war. In 1963, so this is a year later, the Cuban Missile Crisis occurs in 1962. The Berlin Wall has been built, and that was built in 1961. Which we talked about my dad being drafted. So the Berlin Wall was built in 1961. My dad was drafted for the second time as a mistake for the Berlin crisis, sent to Germany in 1962 because of how serious this situation was getting. 1963, a year later after the crisis, of course, things are still happening in Berlin, and we still have the West Germany, East Berlin, West Berlin, but the crisis has calmed down. The Cuban Missile Crisis has calmed down. 1963, Kennedy and Khrushchev set up a hotline to allow U.S. presidents and Soviet leaders to communicate directly in times of crisis. We learned from this experience that we have to communicate with each other. I can't just assume that your country is going to attack me. I can't just assume that you have the worst intentions, right? It might be easier to do that. It might be easier to judge another country if you're a world leader. But we learned from this experience here that you have to communicate. You have to communicate, and that's how you get things done, and that's how you save lives. So that direct phone line, pick it up. It's the Soviet Union. That's going to be really important for the rest of the Cold War, because this is 1963. The Cold War doesn't end until 1990. So this is going to be really important for world leaders, Soviet Union and the United States. The U.S., the Soviet Union, and Great Britain signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty to end testing of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere and underwater. So we had those spy planes that I mentioned, flying over areas that the Soviet Union controlled, and also just flying over the Soviet Union and the water areas, like some islands that they might have controlled, because like the United States, we control some islands, to see if they were testing nuclear weapons. We could test the atmosphere, like for radiation and stuff, to see like what's been going on there. And testing missiles like that is like a sign of like, oh God, what are they doing? And it's scary. It's scary. So same thing with North Korea today. If North Korea all of a sudden just like starts testing nuclear weapons, which they have in the past, we start to get a little nervous, like, oh, what are they doing? Why now? Why are they testing nuclear weapons right now? So it kind of like opens our eyes a little bit, and it's like, okay, let's focus up here. So testing nuclear weapons needs to stop, because it is kind of like a little threatening to other countries. So that's the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. You're not testing like nuclear weapons in the atmosphere, underwater. You're just decreasing the amount of testing that you're doing. Because let's face it, if you have figured out how to make a nuclear weapon, then you can make multiple nuclear weapons. There's really no reason to continue to test these things. So it's also just a sign of strength, and to other countries be like, hey, look what I can do, look what I have now. I have this big, massive nuclear weapon. So that's really important that we have that for sure. The pictures that I have for you are from JFK's museum in Boston, his presidential library. Over here we have a pen and like a bunch of pens right here, and then we have like a book or a piece of paper. So on the left is the pen that Kennedy used to sign the limited nuclear test ban treaty on October 7th, 1963. So he uses that pen. You'll notice that there's many pens back there. When presidents sign bills and then they become laws, they have to sign every letter of their name in a different pen. And then usually, like, when they're done signing it, they will give like a pen to somebody who was involved. Like if I was a senator that helped write this bill and now it's a law, I would get a pen like as a congratulations, like look what I just did. The president signed it, now it is a law. So that's why there's so many back there. So that's the pen that he used to sign it, or one of the pens. And then on the right is the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty right there, the document itself. So pretty cool right there. Yeah, there that is. Actually, and if you know anything about history, and also if you can just like skip ahead to this line, it's going to be something super sad is going to happen. Because I was looking at that date, October 7th, 1963. Next month is November, and something super sad is going to happen to JFK. But anyway, that's all I have for you today. Make sure you write the vocab words. We'll talk about that super sad topic of JFK in the next video. Make sure you have a summary. Don't forget the bell ringer question. We haven't really had that many, but don't forget to answer it. And watch the TED Ed videos if you haven't yet. See you guys.